By late 1944, the Second World War had entered a critical phase. In the West, Allied forces had landed in Normandy in June, opening a second front in Europe. Over the following months, they advanced through France, liberating towns and cities from German occupation. Paris fell in August 1944, and the Allies pushed toward the German border. The momentum was in their favor. However, the German army was far from defeated. Adolf Hitler sought to regain initiative. The Western Front, though under pressure, still offered opportunities for counterattack. The Ardennes Forest in Belgium and Luxembourg became a focal point. Dense woods, narrow roads, and rolling hills made it a challenging landscape for large armored units. The Allies considered it quiet, a secondary sector, and had relatively few troops stationed there. This made it an ideal place for the Germans to strike with surprise. Hitler devised a plan for a major counteroffensive, aiming to split the Allied lines, capture Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into retreat. This operation would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, launched in mid-December 1944. The town of Bastogne held particular importance. Located at the junction of 7 main roads, it was a key logistical hub. Whoever controlled Bastogne could move troops and supplies efficiently across the Ardennes. For the Germans, taking Bastogne meant cutting off the Allies' ability to respond quickly. For the Americans, holding it was essential to slowing the German advance and protecting the larger front. American forces in the area included the 101st Airborne Division, a unit renowned for its training and toughness, though they were lightly equipped for sustained winter combat. The 10th Armored Division and elements of other infantry divisions were also present, but many units were spread thin. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, faced the daunting task of defending the town with limited resources. The soldiers were exhausted from months of continuous movement and combat. Cold, hunger, and fatigue weighed heavily on every man. On the German side, Hitler appointed Field Marshal Walter Model and General Feldmarschall von Rundstedt to oversee the offensive. German forces included elite panzer divisions and experienced infantry units, equipped with tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry. German planners relied on surprise, speed, and the difficult Ardennes terrain to compensate for shortages in fuel and supplies. The operation aimed to overwhelm the Americans before the Allies could reinforce the region. Weather played a significant role. December brought heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures. Snow-covered roads slowed vehicles, but also concealed troop movements. For aircraft, thick clouds and poor visibility grounded much of the Allied air support. German planners counted on this winter weather to delay American reinforcements and protect their forces from air attack. At the same time, American troops had to endure exposure to the cold, ration shortages, and the constant threat of enemy assault. In the days leading up to Bastogne's encirclement, small skirmishes and reconnaissance clashes foreshadowed the coming storm. German units probed American defenses along roads and river crossings. At the same time, Allied intelligence underestimated the size and direction of the German attack, believing the Ardennes offensive would be minor. The 101st Airborne, aware of potential threats, began fortifying positions, digging foxholes, establishing roadblocks, and preparing for a winter battle unlike any they had faced before. Communication was difficult. Radio networks were limited, and many units relied on runners and messengers to carry orders through snow and forest. Supply convoys struggled along narrow, icy roads. Troops had limited ammunition and food, and warmth was a constant concern. Soldiers huddled in basements, barns, and makeshift shelters, trying to conserve heat. Despite these challenges, morale remained relatively high, bolstered by a sense of duty and camaraderie. By December 19th, German forces had begun their push through the Ardennes. They moved quickly, surprising American units along the way. Bastogne soon found itself surrounded. The roads leading in and out of the town were cut. The 101st Airborne prepared to hold the crossroads, knowing that reinforcements could be delayed for days. Soldiers were acutely aware that failure meant the Germans could advance further into Belgium and beyond, potentially altering the course of the war in the West. Bastogne's defense was not just about strategy, it was about survival. The town itself, though small, became a fortress. Soldiers used every available building, roadway, and natural feature to prepare for the German assault. Artillery positions were established on ridges, anti-tank obstacles were constructed on roads, and every available soldier was assigned to a sector. Even local civilians were caught in the preparations, witnessing the transformation of their town into a defensive stronghold. As the first German units approached, the tension was palpable. Snow fell steadily, masking the distant sounds of engines and movement. Every shadow in the forest seemed like a threat. Supplies were stretched thin, and every decision carried life or death consequences. Commanders coordinated with limited information, relying on training, experience, and instinct. Soldiers tightened their grips on rifles and prepared for the assault that would soon engulf the town in one of the harshest battles of the European theater. Bastogne, at that moment, was a crossroads in more than one sense. It was a crossroads of strategy, courage, and human endurance. The men of the 101st Airborne, lightly armed and cold, stood ready to face a formidable enemy. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the forest waited silently, holding the first whispers of the German advance. The stage was set for a battle that would test the limits of leadership, resolve, and survival in the dead of winter. The days following the initial German push through the Ardennes intensified the challenges for American forces. Bastogne, surrounded on all sides, became a focal point of the German plan. Roads leading in and out of the town were blocked by tanks, artillery, and infantry units. For the Americans, the ability to communicate, reinforce, or resupply was severely limited. Commanders relied on fragmented radio networks and couriers moving through snow and forest. Every message carried the risk of interception or delay, making coordinated defense difficult. Supplies were already scarce. The 101st Airborne had arrived in the Ardennes expecting limited engagement, not a prolonged siege in harsh winter conditions. Food rations were minimal, often consisting of canned goods and hard biscuits. Ammunition stocks were insufficient for sustained artillery exchanges. Warm clothing and blankets were almost non-existent, leaving soldiers exposed to temperatures well below freezing. Frostbite and illness were constant threats, adding to the physical and psychological strain. Despite these shortages, soldiers dug into defensive positions with determination, using trenches, hedgerows, and buildings as fortifications. Every obstacle, even a felled tree, became part of the defensive network. The geography of Bastogne and its surroundings added to the challenge. The town was located at a crossroads of 7 main roads, each leading to strategic locations across the Ardennes. Control of these roads allowed movement of troops, armor, and supplies. The forests and hills provided cover for both attackers and defenders, but they also restricted visibility and slowed movement. Narrow roads became choke points, ideal for defensive ambushes, but vulnerable to artillery fire. The snow-covered terrain further complicated mobility. Vehicles frequently became stuck, and foot soldiers struggled through icy mud and drifts. German forces approached with significant numbers and planning. Elite armored divisions, including the 2nd Panzer Division and the Panzerlehr Division, were ordered to converge on Bastogne. Infantry units advanced alongside tanks, supported by artillery and mortars. The German plan relied heavily on speed and surprise, aiming to encircle American forces quickly before they could consolidate. Fuel shortages, however, slowed some units, and the harsh winter weather reduced the effectiveness of mechanized forces. Despite these limitations, the Germans maintained pressure, aware that delay could allow the Americans to reinforce or reorganize. American defensive preparations were meticulous. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe and his staff prioritized key sectors, reinforcing positions around the town's most critical roads. Anti-tank obstacles, including felled trees, logs, and steel barriers, were placed at likely entry points. Artillery units were positioned on high ground where possible, providing overlapping fields of fire. Soldiers created makeshift shelters from rubble and timber, attempting to protect themselves from both enemy fire and the biting cold. Every building, street, and field was examined for tactical advantage. Morale remained a fragile but essential asset. McAuliffe frequently visited units, inspecting positions, offering encouragement, and ensuring orders were clearly understood. Local civilians were caught in the storm of war. Many had already evacuated, while others remained in the town, facing freezing temperatures, shortages, and the constant threat of bombardment. Their homes were converted into defensive positions or medical stations. The civilian population endured the same cold and scarcity as the soldiers, relying on stored food and heating wherever possible. Civilian buildings bore the scars of artillery and small arms fire, transforming Bastogne into a defensive maze. German reconnaissance continued to probe the American defenses. Reconnaissance vehicles and infantry patrols tested roadblocks and defensive positions, seeking weak points. Skirmishes broke out along the outskirts of the town, often in heavy snow that reduced visibility. American soldiers engaged in short, sharp firefights, repelling probes while conserving ammunition. The first signs of full-scale encirclement became evident as the Germans sealed the roads, preventing reinforcements and cutting off escape routes. The siege of Bastogne was taking shape. Weather remained a formidable obstacle for both sides. Snowstorms and low cloud cover grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating aerial reconnaissance and air support. German forces faced similar difficulties, with snow and ice affecting mobility and visibility. Freezing temperatures caused mechanical failures in vehicles and artillery, while soldiers on both sides suffered frostbite and hypothermia. Every movement, every defensive action, and every attack was slowed by the harsh winter. The elements became a silent, unyielding participant in the battle. The defenders of Bastogne understood the stakes. Holding the town meant delaying the German advance, protecting supply lines, and allowing the Allies time to regroup and counterattack. Failure would provide the Germans a clear route through the Ardennes, threatening towns and cities to the west. American soldiers, though isolated and cold, prepared for a fight that would test every skill, every ounce of endurance, and every bit of courage they possessed. In the early hours before the German assault, Bastogne was a town transformed. Roads were fortified with barricades, fields were lined with anti-tank mines, and every building had a potential defensive position. Soldiers huddled in dugouts and cellars, listening to the wind whip through the streets. Snow muffled distant sounds, but the occasional rumble of engines and artillery reminded them that the enemy was near. Commanders worked tirelessly to coordinate defenses, aware that a single mistake could be catastrophic. By the evening of December 19th, German forces had effectively encircled Bastogne. American units were cut off from most reinforcements, relying on airdrops for critical supplies when possible. Communication with other Allied units was limited, forcing local commanders to make decisions independently. Every man in Bastogne understood that the coming battle would be unlike anything they had faced before, a battle defined by isolation, cold, scarcity, and relentless pressure from a determined enemy. Bastogne's defense was not only a military necessity, but a symbol of resilience. The 101st Airborne Division, though facing severe disadvantages in numbers and supplies, stood ready. Their positions, tactics, and determination would define the battle in the Ardennes. Outside the town, German units continued to advance, their movements shrouded in snow and fog. Inside, American soldiers prepared, knowing that the first shots fired would signal the beginning of a brutal confrontation, one that would test courage, leadership, and endurance to the very limit. The first angle in understanding Bastogne is the human cost. Soldiers of the 101st Airborne were facing one of the harshest winters in Europe. Temperatures dropped well below freezing, and snow blanketed the roads and fields. Frostbite was a constant threat. Many men had only thin gloves and worn boots, and some lacked proper winter coats. Hunger and thirst added to their suffering. Rations were minimal, small cans of food, biscuits, and occasional chocolate bars. The soldiers were exhausted from months of continuous movement and combat. Sleep was rare, and rest often came in cold, damp cellars or makeshift shelters. The human toll extended beyond the soldiers. Civilians remaining in Bastogne faced similar hardships, their homes damaged by shell fire and their supplies dwindling. Children, the elderly, and families endured the same freezing cold, witnessing the transformation of their town into a battlefield. The psychological strain was immense. Fear of bombardment, uncertainty about reinforcements, and the relentless German pressure weighed heavily. Yet, amidst these conditions, soldiers displayed remarkable resilience. They formed tight bonds, sharing warmth, food, and hope. Letters home, when they could be sent, offered small comfort, though many feared their words would never reach loved ones. Every soldier knew that survival depended not only on skill but on endurance, courage, and unity. The second perspective focuses on tactical decisions. Bastogne was strategically critical because of its 7 roads leading through the Ardennes. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe and his staff worked quickly to organize the town's defenses. They positioned infantry units to cover main roads, established artillery on elevated terrain, and constructed anti-tank obstacles using logs, rocks, and debris. McAuliffe's decisions emphasized flexibility. Units were given freedom to react to German movements, while reserves were held back to respond to breakthroughs. During the siege, McAuliffe's famous one-word reply, "Nuts," became a symbol of defiance when German forces demanded surrender. But beyond the story, it reflected careful calculation. McAuliffe understood the importance of morale in a defensive battle, and his ability to communicate confidence and authority was crucial. Defensive tactics included using the town's buildings as fortified positions, establishing overlapping fields of fire, and creating fallback positions. Each decision considered terrain, enemy strength, and the limited resources available. The tactical approach combined standard military doctrine with adaptive measures dictated by winter conditions and encirclement, demonstrating the skill and judgment of American commanders under extreme pressure. The third perspective examines weapons and technology used during the battle. American forces relied on rifles, machine guns, mortars, and artillery, but they were lightly equipped compared to the German armored divisions. Anti-tank weapons, such as bazookas and recoilless rifles, were crucial in slowing German panzers. Artillery units were limited in ammunition, requiring careful targeting and coordination. Communication technology was primitive by modern standards. Radios were often unreliable due to weather or terrain, and runners were frequently used to deliver orders. German forces brought a combination of tanks, armored vehicles, mortars, and artillery. Their mechanized units allowed rapid movement through the Ardennes, though snow and ice slowed them significantly. Artillery bombardments targeted defensive positions and roads, aiming to disrupt supply lines and morale. Both sides faced technological limitations imposed by winter conditions. Weapons could freeze, vehicles became immobilized, and artillery accuracy was affected by snow and fog. The battle became a test not only of strategy and courage, but of how effectively each side could use available technology under extreme conditions. Each of these angles, human cost, tactical decisions, and weapons, intersects in Bastogne to create a complex, layered perspective of the battle. Soldiers were constantly balancing survival with mission objectives, adapting tactics to terrain, weather, and enemy movements. Weapons were tools, but their effectiveness depended on human skill and decision-making. Leadership required understanding both material limitations and human endurance. Civilians, caught in the middle, experienced the consequences of military strategy firsthand. Bastogne was not just a military engagement. It was a demonstration of how men respond to extreme conditions, scarcity, and the pressure of an encircled defense. Every rifle fired, every trench dug, and every order given reflected the interplay of planning, improvisation, and sheer determination. The perspective of endurance extends beyond the immediate battle. Soldiers had to carry heavy gear through snow, often under fire. Food shortages meant improvising with available resources, and medical attention was limited. Injured soldiers were treated in basements, barns, or even outdoors, depending on availability of shelter. Cold-related injuries, infections, and exhaustion were constant threats. Despite these hardships, units maintained cohesion. Leadership at the company and platoon level ensured that men remained in position, monitored their comrades' health, and reinforced morale. Communication between sectors, though difficult, was maintained through runners and intermittent radio contact. The resilience of soldiers and the ability to maintain order under extreme conditions was a defining feature of the 101st Airborne's performance. Finally, the integration of human endurance, tactical decision-making, and technology created the defensive reality at Bastogne. Soldiers needed courage to face overwhelming odds, knowledge to implement effective tactics, and skill to use weapons under difficult circumstances. Every factor was magnified by winter conditions. Snow obscured visibility, wind carried sound unpredictably, and roads became muddy traps. Leaders had to adjust quickly, soldiers had to act decisively, and civilians had to survive in the same environment. These combined pressures defined the battle in Bastogne before the full-scale assault began, establishing a framework for understanding the extraordinary efforts required to defend the town. The fourth angle to examine is leadership under pressure. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, faced one of the most challenging situations of the war. His division was lightly equipped, outnumbered, and surrounded by superior German forces. Supplies were limited, winter conditions were severe, and communication with higher command was inconsistent. McAuliffe's leadership style combined calm decisiveness with careful delegation. He understood that every decision could mean life or death for his men. During the German demand for surrender, his one-word reply, "Nuts," captured both defiance and clarity of purpose. Beyond symbolism, it reflected practical leadership. He refused to capitulate, knowing that holding Bastogne was strategically essential and that morale depended on visible confidence. McAuliffe moved through the town regularly, inspecting defensive positions, meeting with officers, and ensuring coordination across sectors. His presence reassured soldiers facing extreme danger, showing that leadership was both a practical and psychological tool. The fifth perspective is the enemy viewpoint. German commanders, including General Heinz Guderian and Field Marshal Walter Model, aimed to achieve rapid penetration of the Ardennes. Their objective was to capture key towns, including Bastogne, and cut Allied supply lines, ultimately forcing a retreat. German units consisted of armored divisions, mechanized infantry, and artillery. Despite careful planning, the offensive faced numerous challenges. Winter weather slowed movement, snow and ice immobilized vehicles, and American resistance proved stronger than anticipated. German soldiers endured harsh conditions as well, facing cold, fatigue, and shortages of fuel and ammunition. Reconnaissance units reported heavy American fortifications, requiring adjustments and strategy. German leadership balanced aggression with caution, constantly recalculating risk as the siege of Bastogne evolved. The encirclement strategy relied on speed, yet the weather and determined defenders made swift victory impossible. From the German perspective, Bastogne was both a tactical target and a logistical challenge, demonstrating how even well-planned operations can be disrupted by terrain, weather, and human resistance. The sixth angle focuses on strategic consequences. Bastogne's defense had far-reaching implications for the Battle of the Bulge and the wider war. By holding the town, the 101st Airborne delayed German forces, preventing rapid movement toward key supply hubs and cities. This delay allowed other Allied units, including General Patton's Third Army, to regroup and counterattack. Holding Bastogne contributed directly to the failure of the German offensive and helped maintain the integrity of the Western Front. The battle demonstrated the importance of well-positioned defensive forces, even when lightly equipped, in influencing larger operational outcomes. Tactical victories in such locations can produce strategic effects far beyond the immediate battlefield. The German inability to seize Bastogne quickly illustrated the interplay between planning, execution, and resistance, highlighting the broader consequences of localized engagements in wartime. The human perspective and leadership challenges were intertwined. Soldiers on the front lines relied on tactical guidance and inspiration from officers. Officers, in turn, relied on soldiers to carry out orders effectively under extreme stress. Each sector of the town required coordination to ensure overlapping fields of fire, protection of key roads, and efficient use of scarce resources. Communication difficulties tested every level of command. Radio failures, blocked roads, and snow-covered trails meant that decisions often had to be made locally, without guidance from higher headquarters. This decentralized command structure required initiative, training, and trust in subordinate leaders. The cohesion and discipline of the 101st Airborne allowed them to respond effectively to German probes and attacks despite these challenges. Technology remained an important element, shaping how both sides fought the battle. American anti-tank weapons, artillery, and mortars were employed with careful coordination. German panzers and mechanized infantry attempted to exploit weaknesses, but snow and ice slowed their advance and reduced maneuverability. Artillery barges were limited by line-of-sight challenges and winter conditions. Soldiers learned to adapt weapons usage to terrain, weather, and enemy movements. Observation posts, forward scouts, and improvised defensive positions enhanced effectiveness. Technology alone did not determine the outcome. Human skill, leadership, and endurance amplified or constrained its impact. Bastogne exemplified how environmental conditions can transform technology from advantage to limitation. Morale and psychology were central to all angles. The knowledge that the town was encircled could have demoralized troops, yet soldiers remained resolute. Shared hardships, camaraderie, and clear leadership fostered unity. Civilians who remained also contributed to morale, offering support, shelter, and assistance when possible. The symbolic importance of holding Bastogne elevated morale beyond individual sectors. Defending the town was not just a military necessity. It became a test of collective willpower and determination. German troops, though initially confident, experienced frustration as their attacks were slowed and repelled, highlighting the psychological interplay between attackers and defenders. The combined perspectives of leadership, enemy strategy, technology, and morale illustrate the complexity of the Bastogne battle. No single factor determined success. Instead, the interplay of human endurance, tactical decisions, environmental conditions, and logistical realities shaped the outcome. The 101st Airborne, under McAuliffe's guidance, successfully balanced these elements, maintaining a defensive posture despite overwhelming odds. German forces, facing unexpected resistance and harsh conditions, were forced to adapt and ultimately delay their objectives. The multidimensional nature of the battle reveals how historical events are the result of multiple, interacting factors rather than isolated decisions or heroism alone. Understanding Bastogne through these angles emphasizes that the battle was not only a confrontation of forces, but a demonstration of the limits of human endurance, the impact of leadership, and the influence of environment and technology. Each perspective, whether the suffering of soldiers, tactical ingenuity, leadership under pressure, enemy objectives, or strategic consequences, offers insight into why Bastogne remains a pivotal event in World War II. These angles provide a comprehensive framework to appreciate the complexity and significance of the siege before the decisive moments of combat unfolded. December 21, 1944. The morning air over Bastogne was bitterly cold, hovering well below freezing. Snow continued to fall in thick flurries, covering the streets and fields in white. Visibility was poor, but distant rumblings signaled that German armored units were advancing. The encirclement of Bastogne was now complete. American soldiers of the 101st Airborne and supporting units prepared for a direct assault. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe moved among his officers, inspecting positions and giving precise orders. Communication with higher headquarters was sporadic. Decisions had to be made on the ground, relying on judgment, training, and coordination between infantry, artillery, and support units. German forces began the attack in the early hours. Panzer divisions, supported by mechanized infantry and artillery, approached the town from multiple directions. Artillery shells pounded the outskirts, reducing houses to rubble and creating obstacles that American soldiers used defensively. Snow muffled the explosions, but vibrations ran through the streets. Infantry moved behind tanks, attempting to breach roadblocks and defensive positions. American machine guns, rifles, and anti-tank weapons were ready. Soldiers fired from prepared positions, targeting exposed armor and infantry. Each exchange tested the endurance of men already fatigued by weeks of exposure, limited rations, and freezing temperatures. The German plan relied on speed and shock. Units attempted to concentrate fire on specific streets to break through defenses. The defenders responded with precision. Bazooka teams engaged tanks at close range. Mortars targeted advancing infantry, and artillery pounded concentrations of German forces at the town's periphery. Communication between platoons and companies was critical. Messengers braved snow and gunfire to deliver orders, while radio operators struggled with intermittent signals. Every decision could determine whether a sector held or fell. By midday, attacks intensified on several key roads. The Germans focused on the northern approach, hoping to cut the town in two. American units had established fallback positions, enabling them to absorb the initial impact and counterattack where possible. Soldiers used every available cover: rubble, hedgerows, and collapsed buildings. Tanks and armored vehicles were positioned to block German movement, while artillery units provided overlapping fire. Ammunition had to be conserved, so every shot was deliberate. The coordination between infantry and support units proved essential in repelling repeated German probes. The human cost became apparent. Soldiers and civilians alike were exposed to artillery fire, small arms fire, and the cold. Injured men were treated in basements or makeshift shelters, often with minimal medical supplies. Frostbite and hypothermia added to the casualties from combat. Yet, despite these extreme conditions, defenders held. Individual acts of courage and quick thinking turned potentially disastrous situations into successful resistance. Soldiers coordinated ambushes, repaired damaged obstacles, and adapted to changing enemy tactics. Leadership at the company and platoon level was crucial. Officers and NCOs ensured that men remained in position, motivated, and capable of carrying out complex defensive maneuvers under pressure. The afternoon saw renewed German pressure. Artillery and mortar fire became heavier, targeting roads, buildings, and defensive positions. Tanks attempted to breach barricades, while infantry pressed forward. American defenders continued to resist, using anti-tank weapons and coordinated fire to halt armored advances. At one point, a German panzer column advanced along the western road, but was stopped by a combination of bazooka fire and pre-registered artillery strikes. The coordination of defensive positions, knowledge of terrain, and adaptability of the troops prevented breakthroughs. Throughout the day, weather continued to complicate operations. Snow and fog limited visibility for both sides. Vehicles became stuck in drifts or mud, forcing soldiers to fight on foot in freezing conditions. The cold affected weapons, artillery, and tanks, creating mechanical failures that required quick improvisation. Despite these obstacles, German forces maintained pressure, aware that time was a critical factor in the overall operation. Any delay allowed the Allies to reorganize, reinforce, and mount counterattacks. Communication with nearby Allied units remained limited. The 101st Airborne was largely isolated, relying on airdropped supplies and improvised coordination. Pilots attempted resupply flights, though heavy snow and low visibility reduced their effectiveness. Parachute drops delivered ammunition, medical supplies, and rations, but distribution was difficult amid ongoing combat. Soldiers risked exposure and enemy fire to retrieve supplies, often under treacherous conditions. Each successful delivery sustained the defenders and enabled them to continue resisting German attacks. By evening, the situation remained tense. German units had tested multiple roads, artillery positions, and defensive sectors. American soldiers, though exhausted and cold, maintained cohesion and discipline. Commanders adjusted positions, reinforced vulnerable sectors, and coordinated overlapping fire. The battle had become a war of attrition, with every meter of ground contested. Leadership, training, and morale were decisive factors. McAuliffe and his officers understood that holding the town, even temporarily, would disrupt German plans and buy critical time for Allied reinforcements to approach. The night brought a temporary lull, though the cold intensified. Snow continued to fall, covering the battlefield in silence. Soldiers huddled in trenches and cellars, keeping watch, checking ammunition, and tending to the wounded. The town had become a fortress, every street, building, and field utilized for defense. German forces prepared to renew their assault the following day, while the defenders consolidated their positions, knowing that the next hours could determine the fate of Bastogne. Bastogne on December 21st was a town under siege. Every attack, every defensive maneuver, and every action taken by soldiers and commanders contributed to the unfolding climax. The combination of human endurance, tactical ingenuity, and environmental challenges created a battle defined by intensity, precision, and uncertainty. As night fell, The men of the 101st Airborne understood that their resistance had slowed the enemy, but the outcome remained undecided. The following day would test the limits of courage, leadership, and survival. December 22, 1944. A bitter dawn broke over Bastogne, blanketed by snow and fog. The town remained encircled by German forces, but the defenders of the 101st Airborne were resolute. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe and his officers conducted early inspections of defensive positions. Supplies were critically low, but coordination and morale held firm. Soldiers moved cautiously through streets hardened by frost, checking barricades, reinforcing positions, and preparing for renewed attacks. Every sector was under constant observation, anticipating the German offensive. German forces launched a major assault at mid-morning. Artillery pounded the outskirts of the town, while panzer divisions moved along the northern and western approaches. Infantry followed closely, attempting to breach defensive lines. The defenders responded with precise fire. Anti-tank teams targeted advancing panzers, machine guns covered open streets, and artillery units fired pre-planned coordinates. Every soldier understood that hesitation could lead to collapse. The battle was intense but disciplined. Chaos was kept in check by training and leadership. While the Germans pressed forward, American troops exploited terrain advantages. Narrow streets, hedgerows, and ruined buildings created natural choke points. Tanks and artillery were positioned to maximize defensive impact, channeling enemy advances into kill zones. Small teams of infantry executed counterattacks when openings appeared, disrupting German formations. Communication remained critical. Runners navigated snow-covered streets under fire to relay orders, while radio operators worked to maintain contact with artillery units. Every success depended on coordination, adaptability, and rapid decision-making. By afternoon, German attacks showed signs of strain. Snow and ice immobilized vehicles, artillery was less effective due to shifting targets, and infantry faced well-fortified positions. Soldiers of the 101st Airborne held firm despite exhaustion and frostbite. Casualties were mounting, yet units maintained cohesion. McAuliffe coordinated reserves to reinforce vulnerable sectors, ensuring that no breakthrough occurred. Leadership at all levels proved decisive. Junior officers and NCOs managed their sectors with precision, compensating for the limited communication with higher command. The turning point came with the approach of General George Patton's Third Army. On December 23rd, elements of Patton's forces advanced through snow-laden roads toward Bastogne. The timing was critical. The 101st Airborne had held the town under siege for 3 days, delaying German objectives and buying precious time. Artillery observers and forward scouts relayed German positions to incoming units, facilitating coordinated strikes. Patton's arrival did not immediately break the siege, but created a new dynamic. German forces now faced the risk of encirclement themselves. American defensive and offensive efforts combined to stall German advances. Panzer divisions attempted renewed pushes, but were met with overlapping fire from infantry and artillery. Bazooka teams disabled tanks at close range, while machine guns covered open streets. The snow, once a challenge, now acted as a force multiplier for defenders. Visibility remained low, forcing German units into narrow approaches and making them vulnerable to prepared defenses. Soldiers adapted constantly, using every available resource and improvising when supplies or equipment failed. Casualty management and medical support were critical. Field medics and improvised medical stations worked under fire, treating gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, and frostbite. Evacuation was difficult, as roads were blocked and snow covered the terrain. Yet, despite these conditions, medical personnel maintained care for the wounded, preventing small injuries from becoming fatal. Morale remained high because soldiers saw comrades survive despite extreme hardship, reinforcing the will to hold the town. By evening, the pressure on German forces had increased. The combination of steadfast defense, tactical ingenuity, and the approaching Third Army disrupted their plan. German units were forced to pause, regroup, and contend with supply shortages exacerbated by weather. The momentum they had hoped to achieve was lost. Bastogne's defenders had withstood repeated assaults, demonstrating the effectiveness of preparation, leadership, and human endurance. Every defensive action, Every counterattack and every decision had contributed to this result. Air support, previously limited by clouds and snow, began to play a small but significant role. Allied aircraft took advantage of breaks in the weather to deliver supplies and conduct reconnaissance. Parachute drops provided critical ammunition and rations, while observation reports improved coordination with artillery. The psychological impact was notable. Defenders gained renewed confidence, while German troops recognized the increasing difficulty of the siege. Bastogne had transformed from a threatened town to a resilient stronghold, delaying the German advance and setting conditions for a broader Allied counteroffensive. By December 24th, the siege began to lose intensity. German forces, exhausted and facing dwindling supplies, began to withdraw from key positions. American soldiers continued to hold the town, repairing defenses and securing roads to facilitate further operations. The arrival of Patton's Third Army created a link to the wider Allied front, ensuring Bastogne would remain in American hands. The German objective of quickly capturing the town and opening the route to Antwerp had failed. Bastogne had withstood the full force of a carefully planned offensive, a testament to leadership, preparation, and resilience. The climax of the Battle of Bastogne highlights the convergence of multiple factors: extreme weather, limited supplies, tactical ingenuity, leadership under pressure, human endurance, and timely reinforcements. The 101st Airborne's defense delayed German objectives and ensured the integrity of the Allied front. Soldiers endured freezing temperatures, scarcity, and relentless assault, yet maintained cohesion and effectiveness. German forces, despite planning, equipment, and numbers, could not overcome the determined defense. Bastogne exemplified the complexity and intensity of combat, showing that resilience, strategy, and courage could determine the outcome even under seemingly insurmountable conditions. The Battle of Bastogne left the town and its defenders profoundly changed. By the end of December 1944, the immediate fighting had subsided, but the human cost was evident in every street and building. The 101st Airborne Division had held the town for days under extreme conditions, but casualties were significant. Estimates suggest that American forces suffered several hundred killed and wounded during the siege. German forces also endured heavy losses, with hundreds of soldiers killed, wounded, or immobilized due to the cold and the intensity of the defense. Frostbite and cold-related injuries added to the toll on both sides, compounding the effects of combat wounds. Many soldiers faced long-term physical and psychological consequences from the extreme exposure, continuous fighting, and high stress. Bastogne itself bore the scars of battle. Artillery bombardments had reduced sections of the town to rubble. Homes, businesses, and public buildings were heavily damaged or destroyed. Roads were cratered from tank and artillery movements, while barricades and obstacles littered streets and fields. Civilians who had remained faced enormous hardship. Food shortages and lack of heating forced many to rely on stored supplies or aid from American forces. Medical care was limited, and the wounded were treated under harsh conditions in makeshift hospitals and cellars. The civilian population endured cold, hunger, and fear, witnessing firsthand the destructive power of modern warfare. Psychological impact on soldiers was immense. Troops had fought in near-total isolation, under encirclement, with constant threat of artillery and armored assault. The experience of holding Bastogne instilled a profound sense of responsibility, as each soldier understood that failure could have catastrophic consequences for the wider war effort. Leadership played a critical role in maintaining morale. Brigadier General McAuliffe's calm decisiveness and visible presence reassured troops. Company and platoon leaders ensured discipline and cohesion despite exhaustion, hunger, and freezing temperatures. Letters sent home, when possible, reflected pride, relief, and the heavy emotional burden carried by those who had endured the siege. Medical units and field hospitals faced extreme challenges. Wounded soldiers were treated in cold, cramped conditions with limited supplies. Frostbite, trench foot, and hypothermia were common, and medical teams worked tirelessly to stabilize men under constant threat of renewed fighting. Triage and prioritization became necessary, as resources were insufficient to treat all casualties immediately. Despite these challenges, Medical personnel ensured that many soldiers survived injuries that might otherwise have been fatal. The ability to provide care in such conditions was a testament to planning, improvisation, and determination. The siege's intensity tested every aspect of military operations, supply chains, communication, command structure, and defensive tactics. Ammunition was carefully rationed and allocated to critical sectors. Food and medical supplies were distributed sparingly, often requiring soldiers to travel through snow and under fire to deliver them. Communication relied on runners and limited radio connections. Units had to act independently at times, adapting plans as the situation evolved. The successful defense of Bastogne demonstrated the importance of preparation, adaptability, and initiative at all levels of command. From a strategic perspective, Bastogne's defense disrupted German plans during the Battle of the Bulge. By holding the town, the 101st Airborne delayed German forces from advancing toward key supply lines and cities. This delay allowed Allied units, including General Patton's Third Army, to regroup and mount counteroffensives. Bastogne's resistance contributed directly to halting the German offensive, preserving the integrity of the Western Front, and preventing a potentially catastrophic breach of Allied defenses. The significance of holding a single town illustrated how localized actions could have broader operational and strategic consequences. Civilian experiences highlighted the intersection of warfare and human endurance. Remaining residents faced destruction of property, cold, scarcity of food, and continuous fear. Some homes were repurposed as defensive positions, hospitals, or command posts. Civilians contributed when possible, providing shelter, information, or aid to soldiers. Their resilience, like that of the soldiers, reflected the human capacity to endure extreme conditions. The psychological impact of witnessing urban combat, destruction, and the suffering of neighbors created lasting memories for those who survived. Reports from both Allied and German commanders offer further insight into the battle's consequences. American reports emphasize the extraordinary courage and endurance of the 101st Airborne, praising leadership, coordination, and the ability to maintain cohesion under severe conditions. German accounts acknowledge that the siege of Bastogne did not achieve its intended objectives, attributing failure to strong defenses, adverse weather, logistical challenges, and determined resistance. Both sides recognized that the battle demonstrated the limits of mobility and the decisive influence of terrain, weather, and human factors on operational outcomes. The aftermath also revealed logistical lessons. Resupply operations, including airdrops, highlighted both the importance and the challenges of sustaining troops under siege. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies delivered by air proved critical in maintaining defensive capacity. However, distribution in snow-covered, contested streets required coordination and bravery. Soldiers who retrieved and distributed these supplies risked exposure and enemy fire. The success of such operations reinforced the need for adaptable logistics and innovative solutions under extreme conditions. In Bastogne, physical destruction, casualties, and psychological strain combined to leave a lasting imprint. Soldiers and civilians alike faced extreme cold, hunger, injury, and fear. Yet, the determination and resilience displayed shaped the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge. Holding Bastogne prevented the Germans from exploiting a crucial strategic position, allowed Allied reinforcements to arrive, and maintained the momentum of the Western Allied advance. The siege became a defining example of human endurance, leadership, and the tactical use of terrain and preparation. By late December 1944, Bastogne stood as a symbol of resistance. Its streets, though damaged, still held defenders who had withstood relentless pressure. Soldiers were exhausted, yet morale, strengthened by leadership and shared hardship, remained intact. Civilians, though suffering, had survived one of the harshest sieges in the European theater. Bastogne's immediate aftermath reflected both the cost and the significance of defending the town, a testament to courage, coordination, and the ability of ordinary men to endure extraordinary conditions in the midst of global conflict. In the days following the defense of Bastogne, military analysts and commanders began assessing the broader strategic impact. The town's successful defense delayed the German advance through the Ardennes, preventing rapid exploitation of weak points in the Allied line. The Germans, forced to pause and regroup, lost the momentum essential to the success of their Ardennes offensive. This delay was crucial, allowing Allied reinforcements, including elements of General Patton's Third Army, to reach the front and mount counterattacks. Bastogne's resistance effectively denied the Germans a critical junction for their operational objectives. Commanders on both sides recognized that holding or losing Bastogne would influence not only the immediate battle, but also the wider campaign in Western Europe. The physical and logistical toll of the battle became apparent in detailed reports. Roads were heavily cratered from artillery bombardments, making movement of vehicles and supplies difficult. Bridges were damaged or destroyed, complicating both military and civilian travel. Buildings across the town were shattered, with walls pocked by shell fire, roofs collapsed, and interiors ruined. Anti-tank obstacles, barbed wire, and trenches littered streets and fields. Vehicles immobilized in snow became permanent wrecks, serving as both obstacles and reminders of the battle's intensity. Despite the destruction, soldiers and engineers worked to restore functionality wherever possible, clearing paths, repairing key structures, and re-establishing supply lines. Casualty reports reflected the intensity of the siege. The 101st Airborne and supporting American units had suffered hundreds of killed and wounded, while German forces endured similar losses. Frostbite, exposure, and exhaustion accounted for additional casualties on both sides. Medical personnel, operating in difficult conditions, treated injuries with limited resources. Makeshift hospitals were established in basements, barns, and other available buildings. Despite the lack of facilities, many soldiers survived due to the dedication and skill of field medics. The experience highlighted the critical importance of medical support and triage in sustaining combat effectiveness under siege conditions. Psychological effects of the siege were profound. Soldiers who had endured days of constant artillery fire, small arms engagements, freezing temperatures, and isolation developed heightened stress and fatigue. Despite this, morale remained resilient due to strong leadership, camaraderie, and the shared understanding of the battle's strategic importance. Brigadier General McAuliffe's visibility, decisiveness, and calm demeanor reassured troops and strengthened cohesion. German soldiers, while disciplined and experienced frustration and declining morale as repeated attacks failed and weather hampered their operations. The psychological interplay between attackers and defenders significantly influenced the conduct and outcome of the siege. Civilian experiences added another dimension to the aftermath. Those who remained in Bastogne endured extreme hardship, including cold, hunger, injury, and property destruction. Homes were converted into defensive positions, shelters, or hospitals. Civilians assisted soldiers when possible, providing information, food, or shelter. The physical and psychological toll on the population was immense, but survival and resilience became defining features of the town. The interplay between civilian endurance and military defense underscored the human cost of urban warfare and the broader impact of strategic operations on local populations. Official military assessments recognized Bastogne as a pivotal point in the Battle of the Bulge. Reports highlighted the effective use of terrain, fortifications, and limited resources by the 101st Airborne. Commanders emphasized the importance of preparation, coordination, and leadership in enabling a smaller, less equipped force to resist a superior enemy. German reports acknowledged the difficulties imposed by strong defenses, adverse weather, and logistical limitations, noting that failure to capture Bastogne quickly disrupted operational plans and contributed to the overall failure of the Ardennes offensive. Both sides understood that Bastogne demonstrated the decisive influence of localized defense on the outcome of larger campaigns. Logistical lessons were critical. The reliance on airdropped supplies highlighted both the potential and limitations of resupply under siege. Snow and enemy fire complicated distribution, yet successful delivery of ammunition, food, and medical supplies enabled continued resistance. Coordination between air support and ground units improved over the course of the siege, demonstrating adaptability and the importance of flexible logistics. Engineers and soldiers worked to maintain roads, clear obstacles, and restore essential functions in a town heavily impacted by combat, illustrating the necessity of combining planning, improvisation, and physical labor in sustaining operational capability. Long-term historical assessments emphasized Bastogne's symbolic and operational significance. Holding the town exemplified the capacity of a determined, well-led, and resilient force to resist superior numbers and equipment. The 101st Airborne's performance became a model of effective defensive operations, demonstrating the value of preparation, terrain utilization, and leadership under extreme conditions. Historians note that Bastogne delayed German objectives, preserved Allied operational integrity, and directly contributed to the eventual failure of the Ardennes offensive. The town's defense is often cited as a turning point in the Western Front campaign, illustrating how determined local action can shape larger strategic outcomes. Bastogne's aftermath also influenced military doctrine and training. Lessons learned regarding winter warfare, supply management under siege, decentralized command, and coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery informed subsequent operations. The integration of small unit initiative with overall strategic objectives highlighted the importance of flexibility and adaptability in combat. Soldiers' endurance under extreme conditions became a benchmark for evaluating leadership, training, and resilience in modern military operations. By late December 1944, Bastogne stood as a symbol of courage, endurance, and strategic significance. Its defenders had withstood relentless assault, freezing temperatures, and logistical scarcity, ultimately preventing German forces from achieving their objectives. Civilians, though suffering greatly, survived the siege alongside soldiers, witnessing both destruction and extraordinary human resilience. Bastogne's streets, once battle-scarred, now represented the intersection of courage, leadership, and strategy in a defining moment of World War II. The Battle of Bastogne remains one of the most remarkable episodes of the Second World War. It illustrates the extraordinary impact of leadership, resilience, and determination under extreme conditions. The 101st Airborne Division, lightly equipped and surrounded, held a critical crossroads against a numerically superior and well-armed German force. Their defense demonstrated that courage and preparation could alter the course of larger operations, shaping the outcome of the Battle of the Bulge and the Western Front as a whole. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's calm decisiveness exemplified effective leadership in wartime. His ability to maintain morale, coordinate defenses, and make rapid decisions under pressure was as vital as the soldiers' physical endurance. The famous one-word reply, "Nuts," became symbolic of defiance, but its deeper significance lay in the practical and psychological strength it conveyed. Leadership, training, and cohesion turned a vulnerable position into an impenetrable defense. Bastogne also highlights the interplay between human endurance and environmental conditions. Freezing temperatures, snow-covered terrain, and limited supplies tested both soldiers and civilians. Frostbite, exhaustion, and hunger compounded the dangers of artillery and armored attacks. Yet the defenders adapted, improvising solutions, reinforcing positions, and maintaining cohesion despite isolation. The battle underscored how terrain, weather, and logistics could magnify or constrain military operations. The siege's aftermath revealed the lasting consequences of determined defense. Casualties were high, buildings destroyed, and civilians traumatized. Yet, strategically, Bastogne's resistance delayed the German advance, allowed Allied reinforcements to arrive, and preserved the integrity of the Western Front. The battle became a benchmark for studying leadership, tactical innovation, and human resilience in warfare. Ultimately, Bastogne stands as a testament to the courage and endurance of ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. It shows how determination, preparation, and unity can resist overwhelming odds. The town's defense was not only a tactical victory, but a defining moment of human perseverance in the darkest winter of war. History remembers Bastogne for its strategy, its leadership, and, most importantly, for the men who endured, held, and survived against forces that seemed insurmountable. As we reflect on Bastogne, consider the courage and endurance of those who faced impossible odds. The story of the 101st Airborne is not just history. It is a testament to human resilience, leadership, and the strength of unity under pressure. If this journey through Bastogne moved you, subscribe to our channel to explore more untold stories of World War II. Hit the notification bell to be the first to witness cinematic, historically accurate accounts of battles, leaders, and events that shaped the world. Share this documentary with friends and history enthusiasts, and honor the sacrifices of those who fought for survival and freedom. History is not just in books. It lives in the stories we remember. Join us, and keep the legacy of Bastogne and the brave men of the 101st Airborne alive.